So hey, welcome back to the channel. So I want to talk a little bit about the rodeo that I went to the other night using my A9 III. I thought it'd be a really good test of the A9 III for high ISO performance, and boy was I right about that. So I'm going to go over the user experience and kind of what settings I use for photo and video, and talk a little bit about the results. So we can start off talking about the video settings. I thought all the video looked great, okay? I have no complaints there. I was using S-Log 3. I was at 2.8. I shot most everything in 60 frames per second. I did shoot a couple of clips 120 frames per second and 240 frames per second, but basically just stayed at the 60 frames per second. I personally like that for this type of stuff because you can slow it down, speed it up, do all that kind of stuff. Again, I was shooting S-Log 3. The base ISO for the A9 III is 2000. I was up to 3200. My meter was on about 0 or plus 0.3 the whole time. So I thought the video came out looking good. Maybe a little bit underexposed in the end, but I thought it looked pretty good. We move over into the photo section. And like I was saying there, I was using my 7200 at 2.8. I started off at 1,000th of a shutter speed and decided that was too slow. So I went up to 1,250th of a shutter speed. And I think that was what I needed. That seemed to freeze the action pretty good. My ISO, I started off at 12,800, and that was because that was where my camera was limited to. I didn't realize that until a few photos into the session that I needed to raise it some more just based on the meter. So I went into the photos and raised the ISO limit a little bit, and I wound up taking most of the photos at 16,000 ISO. So pretty high ISO for this particular project. I started off shooting at 60 frames per second, but I found that the buffer speed wouldn't last as long as I needed it to. So I needed to buffer the last 8 to 9 seconds. That's generally what kind of a rodeo you need in a rodeo. And I found that 20 frames per second did that with the SD cards that I had when I was shooting. So I stuck at 20 frames per second for pretty much everything else. So we can start off talking about the viewfinder a little bit. And the viewfinder, the settings and stuff have changed compared to what the cameras I've used in the past. This is a really important point to make if you're going to be using the A9 Mark III, and I think the A1 II has this setting as well. Like a week or so ago when I was out using the A9 III, I noticed that when I was looking through the viewfinder, it was really dim inside the viewfinder because the brightness setting was set on auto for the viewfinder, which is something I didn't even know existed. So once I figured that out, why it was so dim, I went in and changed the settings for the viewfinder, and I put the settings on as bright as I could get it in the viewfinder. I changed the frame rates to high and the quality to high, and that's the settings that I started off with in the viewfinder. Okay, so when I was taking photos and taking these bursts, like when I started off, I was looking through the viewfinder, starting to burst, and then towards the end of my burst, I could see that the picture in the viewfinder was starting to grade. I started seeing a lot of weird stuff going on. Like you could really see noise, and I don't know if it was noise or not, but the picture in the viewfinder just started to degrade a lot towards the end of the burst. But when I went to look at my photos, review my photos, you know, I was hitting the playback button and looking in the viewfinder, and all the photos looked fine in my viewfinder, but I had the brightness on high. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then when I was taking photos, to me it looked like everything was either properly exposed or way overexposed in the viewfinder because I had the setting set on high brightness. But I could see the meter was underexposed. So I had two different things going on. I had a meter that was underexposed, and what I saw in the viewfinder was either exposed properly or even brighter than what I thought. So getting conflicting information there. And because of the noise and the photo degradation that I saw in the viewfinder towards the end of my burst, I didn't want to go up anymore on the ISO. So I only went up to 16,000 and probably should have went up even more. Some of the photos that I got back at the rodeo were definitely underexposed. Okay, which leads me to the next thing is JPEGs and RAWs and how the photos turned out and what they looked like and all that stuff. So everything I'm about to say, please keep in mind that the A9 III was built for sports and action and speed, okay? So when I got the photos back into, Lightroom and was looking at them, again, I was using 16,000 ISO. I started looking at JPEGs. They were all underexposed a little bit. Because like I was saying, I was looking through the viewfinder, everything looked fine, but my pictures were underexposed. Got them back in, started looking at them. The JPEGs looked fine, just a little bit dark. So I thought to myself, well, I can just go into Lightroom, pick the ones I want, and just kind of raise the exposure and raise the shadows, or, edit them how I want them. When I started to do that, I noticed that there was a whole bunch of noise that was introduced into the raw photos, to the point where they were pretty much, once I got done editing them, they were unusable unless I used denoise in the Lightroom. And that's what I had to do to get the photos that I got at the rodeo. And I think they looked okay, but I'm just not a huge fan of using denoise in Lightroom. But I'd rather not do that, because I think using denoise, for some situations it's probably great, but sometimes it just makes stuff look kind of plasticky and fake. Personally, I don't like using denoise unless I absolutely have to use it to save the pictures, which in this case I did. So if you're going to be using, I think that when you think about the A9 III, I think most sports users aren't shooting with the intention of editing the photos. They're shooting their JPEGs and they're getting them out there as soon as possible. And then I think the JPEGs coming straight out of the camera have a lot of noise reduction added to them. So the JPEGs will look fine. You get back into the raw photos, there's a lot of noise there. So just one thing to keep in mind. Another thing, when I was going in to edit those photos, I was noticing that there's just not a whole lot of dynamic range in the files. And I think people have made a big deal about this in the past. I don't think it's going to be a problem in this extreme situation. There just wasn't a whole lot of room to, raise the exposures and raise the shadows and play with all the settings like I normally have. Generally, every Sony camera I've had in the past, you get a raw file out of the camera and it's just like, you can pretty much do anything with it. You can push it and pull it and do the colors, and I mean, just anything goes, and it'll turn out looking good because there's so much dynamic range there. And I noticed with this camera, when I started doing that, it was a little bit limited. And I've heard online that people say that this has about much dynamic range as like an APS-C camera. And having used an APS-C camera, I tend to agree with that. It's pretty good, but it's not as good as some of the other Sony cameras in the past. But I don't think this camera was built for that specific purpose. I don't think this camera was built to push and pull the colors, push and pull the highlights and the shadows, and do all this heavy duty photo editing. I think this camera was built for speed. The JPEGs look good, and get the JPEGs to where they need to go to be published. And this camera does great at that. Let's talk about the 24 megapixels. I personally think that these high megapixel cameras and megapixels in general is pretty overblown at this point. I think it's a marketing ploy that's just got repeated and repeated and repeated over and over and over again until now everybody accepts it as fact that, more megapixels the better, and that 24 megapixels isn't enough. 24 megapixels is more than enough unless you're printing billboard size stuff. It's fine. And you can even crop in on it. And you can even use the APS-C crop. Now, I used the APS-C crop in a few photos. Couldn't really tell much of a difference. Now, the thing you can't do is you can't use the APS-C crop and then crop some more. That's where you get into problems. The 24 megapixels is more than enough, and it's more enough to crop. So, unless you're cropping heavy, you know, like I can see birders, the few photos that I've taken of bird, like birds are like, you know, little bitty things like this, and you're wanting to fill the frame with that. You need the extra megapixels to make that big of a crop. A9 III, you're going to be shooting humans, primarily, you know, larger objects, big wildlife, things like that. There's more than enough megapixels to crop adequately. So that's just my opinion on the megapixels. Other than those two things, I think the camera handled great. I shot all night with it, like about 3 hours. I sat there and shot. The grip is great. The new body design is awesome. I love it. I could use like a bottom plate on it just to give me a little bit more real estate to hold on to. Other than that, I love the new body design. The camera never overheated. The autofocus worked great. I pretty much just left it on center point autofocus because it just kind of worked the best. The tracking and all that would seem to lose it a little bit. Like, I mean, things are happening fast in a rodeo arena. And then, you know, you want to be focused on something coming out of the gate. And then they open the gate and then you have to hit tracking. And it's just the whole thing. It's just best just to use center point in those situations. And the autofocus worked great. I mean, there's just a few pictures that was out of focus all night long. And the video as well, it all looked great. The only time it was ever out of focus was when there was a railing right in front of me. And sometimes my little center point would hit that railing and I'd lose focus on what was going on. And that was pretty much the only time. But other than that, the camera performed excellent. So if you're buying this camera, make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on with the viewfinder settings. Those are really important. And they can also be kind of deceiving if you don't have them set right. Also, if you're buying this camera and you're used to pushing and pulling the colors all to bejesus, and you know, come to expect a huge amount of dynamic range and ability to push and pull every color and edit to your heart's desired, this might not be the camera for you, because I just don't think this is what that camera was built for. So I appreciate you watching. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button. If you want to see more content like this, make sure you go ahead and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one. Oh, and if you have any questions about the A9 III, drop them in the comments down below. I'll be happy to answer any of them that I can. You know, my knowledge is limited because I'm pretty dumb, but we can at least, if you need to know something, I can at least try to answer for you. Catch you on the next one.